The issue with every UFC division right now, that's what I want to discuss today. Obviously, the UFC is not in the best state right now in terms of the champions and the log jams in some of the divisions. So I want to go through and talk about every single UFC division and what the biggest problem that's plaguing them are right now. And yeah, let's get right into it. Starting off with the welterweight division. Might be the worst one. The welterweight division, I think, is the most inactive division in all of the UFC. And granted, you have Belal Muhammad as the champion. Let me just roast Belal a little bit because he was going off about Leon being an inactive champion or inactive fighter in general. And Belal Muhammad has one fight in 2023. He has one fight in 2024. And now he's not going to have his first fight until midway through 2025. And I wouldn't be surprised if we only saw Belal Muhammad once this year. So a bit of a hypocrite for Belal to go after Leon for being an inactive fighter when he's been one of the most inactive fighters in the welterweight division. I mean, he's had, 3 fights in the last 4 years, maybe? 3 or 4 years. It's inactivity at its finest. Shavkat Rakhmonov, one of my favorite fighters, but I low-key hopes he loses because he only fights once a year as well. This guy literally stays injured. Kamaru Usman has not fought since October of 2023. Hasn't won a fight since November of 2021. Somehow he's still ranked at number 3 in the welterweight division. Leon Edwards, yes, I know he's fighting next weekend, but Leon Edwards is notoriously known as an inactive fighter. This guy fights once a year on average, it seems. So it's like the welterweight division, sure, you have guys like Buckley and like Ian Gary who are decently active. Well, Buckley's been super active, but then you also have guys like JDM who have been out for a year. He's getting a title shot against Belal because Shavkat is out. But JDM, he's been out for a year as well. Granted, he was injured, and before that, he was active. But it's like, man, the welterweight division, there are no wheels turning. There's nothing happening. There's a million contenders for Belal Muhammad to fight, and he won the belt all the way back in July, and he's going to have his first title defense in May. He takes a full 10 months off because he had an infection on his toe. It's ridiculous, man. I want to see the belts defended more. I want to see these contenders get their shots. I mean, there's Shavkat, there's Usman, there's Leon, there's Brady, there's JDM, there's Buckley, there's Gary. There's literally unlimited contenders at welterweight, and Belal Muhammad is holding up the division by not fighting. Yes, I know he's scheduled to fight at UFC 315, but my point is, this guy hasn't fought since July. Why are we waiting all the way until May to get him back in the cage? It's nonsense. And yes, his fans will tell you, bro, Belal signed to fight in December and he got injured. Yeah. So you're telling me an infected toe takes 5 months to heal? That's a load of BS. Belal Muhammad's one of the most inactive champions right now, and he's a hypocrite. And so are the rest of the welterweight division. That's always been the problem with welterweight, at least in like the last 2 or 3 years. The fighters are just not active. We're not seeing matchups at welterweight barely happen. It looks like we're getting the ball rolling on some of these guys, but Usman and Shavkat still nowhere to be found. Usman's been yapping it up with Henry Cejudo on his podcast, but no fight announcement inside. I think he's stalling out for a title shot. Listen, Kamaru Usman, you're not getting a title shot, bro. You're 0-3 in your last 3 fights, and you haven't fought in a year and a half. It's time you defend or just retire. Kamaru Usman should fight Buckley. But yes, the biggest thing plaguing the welterweight division, in my opinion, is the activity of the division itself. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. Moving on to the bantamweight division, obviously, Merab Dvalishvili is your champion, and yeah, man, Merab is the problem with the bantamweight division. Let's keep it real. Merab has beat contender 1, 2, and 3, and contender 4 and 5 are both coming off losses. So it's like the entire top 5 is ineligible for a title shot, and it's a weird thing because you also had undeserved title shots to Umar Nurmagomedov, who got an undeserved title shot. But I do understand circumstantially that he was kind of the guy that made sense at the time. You arguably could have gave it to Petr Yan, but they went with Umar, who had never fought Merab because Petr Yan had already got 50-45. And then Sean O'Malley, who's in talks right now to rematch Merab, which is kind of absurd considering that Sean O'Malley lost and he has no win since then and he hasn't fought since then, but he's rewarded with an immediate title shot. Listen, I know the UFC wants to push O'Malley as a star, but this guy has no mic skills, and it's like, why are we pushing O'Malley so heavy? This guy crapped the bed at the spear, and he lost to Merab. Granted, he won the 5th round, and he did better against Merab, arguably, than anybody else. He still lost the fight. He had one title defense against a journeyman in Marlon Vera, and yeah, man, I don't think Sean O'Malley deserves an immediate rematch. But that's what the UFC and Dana White are going to push. So he probably will be fighting around International Fight Week, the rematch with Merab. Merab should arguably be fighting Petr Yan, who's on a 2-fight win streak. Listen, I know the rematch isn't appealing because Petr Yan got 50-45, but he's the only fighter in the top 5 that's on a win streak right now, a 2-fight win streak. Everybody else is coming off a loss. That's just what it is, bro. That's the reality of the division. So yes, Merab Dvalishvili, I just think he beats everyone. I don't think O'Malley beats him in a rematch. I don't think Petr Yan beats him in a rematch. I don't think Umar beats him in a rematch. I do not think Corey Sandhagen or Figgy beat him. Merab, his cardio is unstoppable, and let's be real, he's not the most exciting champion. So Bantamweight's in a bit of a tough spot. The UFC is hoping and praying that O'Malley lands that laser beam right hand on Merab Dvalishvili in that rematch and puts him out and comes back on top. Because you already know if Merab gets knocked out by Sean O'Malley, the UFC's never giving him another title shot. So, yeah. The biggest issue with the Bantamweight division is undeserved title shots going around in a circle, and Merab has pretty much beaten everyone. So what else is there to do for him? He might as well just retire at this point because no one's going to beat him with his cardio. And yeah, that's really the reality of the Bantamweight division. The heavyweight division, I mean, is it any more obvious what's the issue with the heavyweight division? It's Jon Jones. He's been the plague of the heavyweight division since he beat Cyril Gane at UFC 285 to win the title. Jon Jones has been inactive. This guy's had 2 fights in the last 5 years. Since he fought Dominic Reyes, he's only fought 2 times against Cyril Gane and old man Stipe, choosing to fight a 42-year-old retired Stipe instead of fighting his active interim champion who had a title defense, by the way. So Jon Jones has actively been ducking Tom Aspinall. I know those negotiations are underway, but I do not think Jon Jones is going to sign the contract. I think Jon Jones is going to end up stalling out the division and eventually just retiring. And then Tom will probably be promoted to undisputed champ, or they'll do Tom versus like a Jelton Almeida for undisputed champ. And yeah, man, the top of the heavyweight division has been in shambles for a while with Jon Jones just holding it up and the UFC allowing him to do it. Dana White and the UFC love Jon Jones. And for everybody saying that Tom Aspinall should be active, let me point this out to you guys. Tom Aspinall cannot defend the interim belt anymore. You want to know why? Because the UFC will not allow it. They know that every time Tom Aspinall defends that interim belt, it makes Jon Jones look worse. So the UFC has put Tom Aspinall on ice, waiting on Jon Jones, knowing that if he defends that interim belt more, it's going to make Jon Jones look worse and worse. And as we know, Jon Jones is Dana White's golden goose. He doesn't want to make him look any worse. He wants a Michael Jordan of the sport, so he allows Jon Jones to stall out the entire division for 2.5 years now. But either way, outside of Jones ducking, the UFC heavyweight division has 2 more issues. One, we're in the blob era, dude. We got a bunch of fat, unathletic heavyweights that literally look like they've never trained a day in their life. And these guys are in the top 10, top 15 of the heavyweight division. And it's like Tom Aspinall is levels above all these guys, and he's not going to get the credit he deserves because most of the heavyweight division right now is terrible. The heavyweight division was so much better 5 to like 8 years ago. So much better. The guys of heavyweight today are just not the same. And in a way, I understand it because bigger guys are not going to go into MMA. There's not a lot of money in it. They're going to go in the American football. They're going to go into boxing. You know, there's a lot more money in those sports. Whereas the UFC, if you come as a heavyweight, you know, you don't have to train much. You just get in there, rock 'em, sock 'em robots, and hope for the best. And that's kind of what these guys like Shamil Gaziev and Tai Tuivasa, Marcin Tybura, Derek Lewis, that's kind of what they all are. None of them are really that skilled. They just have a big, powerful punch with terrible cardio, and they're not in shape. So obviously we're in the blob era. And on top of that, the UFC has a lack of heavyweights, which is why whenever they cut Jairzinho Rozenstruik, I was extremely surprised. I mean, the UFC has such a lack of heavyweights that Taliesin Teixeira beat Justin Tafa, right, who wasn't even ranked, I don't believe. He got 1 win in the UFC, and he's now ranked in the heavyweight division, I think, at number 14. Tai Tuivasa is on a 5-fight losing streak, and he's ranked number 11 in the heavyweight division. The UFC has such a lack of heavyweights that they have to have guys who are on a 5-fight losing streak and guys that have 1 win get into the top 15. There's not a lot of heavyweights out there, and the reason being is that, like I said, the big guys in sports are going to American football. They're going to boxing. They're going to other sports that pay more money, and it makes sense on why we have such crappy heavyweights. I miss the old days, man. I miss the Fabricio Verdums, Cain Velasquez's, the Junior Dos Santoses, the Roy Nelsons even, the Brendan Schaubs, you know. No, I'm joking. But yeah, the heavyweight division is in shambles because of Jon Jones and just because of not a lot of skilled fighters. I mean, the heavyweight division is very top heavy. Outside the top 6, it drops off a cliff. The level of skill from rank 7 to 15 is just not there, man. And yeah, heavyweight, I hope we see a revamp in the next like 2 to 3 years and we see some better heavyweights coming up because good Lord, right now, it is extremely embarrassing for the UFC to have the heavyweight division as it is. The featherweight division, the biggest issue with the featherweight division is Ilya has left the division, right? He's vacated the title, and the guy that he knocked out cold, Volkanovski, is coming back to fight for the title, right? If Volkanovski beats Diego Lopez, the whole division will be in Ilya's shadow because Ilya KO'd Volk And now Volkanovski is going to be walking around parading with the belt despite getting knocked out by the guy who vacated it. And I love Volkanovski, but I do think it is healthier for the division if Diego Lopez wins and knocks him out or beats him, because Diego Lopez does not have a loss to Topuria. So the division can kind of move on and say, okay, Topuria never beat Diego Lopez, you know, so it doesn't really matter if he leaves the division because we have a champion now that doesn't have a loss to him. Whereas Volkanovski got knocked out cold by Ilya. So if he goes in there and schools, let's say he schools Diego Lopez and he schools Movsar Evloev, and it's like Volkanovski, he's amazing, he's great, he's going to be top 3, top 2 all time, but it's like Ilya Topuria has left a giant shadow over the division, and it almost delegitimizes Volkanovski's second title reign. In a way, not really, but in a way, if you get what I'm saying. And so, yeah, I am rooting for Diego Lopez. He is my favorite fighter, but I will not be mad if Volkanovski gets it done. But I'm picking Diego by KO. Either way, another thing plaguing the featherweight division is inactivity. And again, you guys are going to point out how Yair Rodriguez is scheduled to fight Patricio Pitbull. I understand that, but this guy literally fights once a year. Brian Ortega fights once a year. Arnold Allen seems to fight once every 10 to 11 months. Movsar Evloev once a year. Where are these guys, man? You're not seeing more than 2 fights a year from these guys in their entire UFC careers. And it's like, they wonder why they can't build up like a fan base, or maybe not a fan base, but they struggle to, like, I don't know, get a title shot again or anything like that. I don't know what I'm saying, boys, but yes, the inactivity of the featherweight division it's not as bad as, let's say, the welterweight division, but it's up there, man. Where are these guys? Where's Brian Ortega? Where's Arnold Allen? Where's Movsar Evloev? Movsar is going to stall out for a title shot, I guess rightfully so. He's 9-0 in the UFC, but Arnold Allen was 10-0 in the UFC. He didn't get a title shot. He got Max Holloway. Make Movsar fight again. I don't care, man. I'm tired of these. Make Movsar get a finish. This guy's 9-0 in the UFC with no finishes. But yes, I want to see more activity in the featherweight division. I want to see Diego win over Volk so the division can move on from Ilya. And yeah, that's the 2 things I think is plaguing the featherweight division. Inactivity and the division potentially living in Ilya's shadow for at least the little time ahead after Volk wins the belt. Maybe the next year it'll live in Ilya's shadow until Volk maybe loses the belt or retires himself. So that are the things that are plaguing the divisions, in my opinion. And the flyweight division, listen, what's plaguing the flyweight division is that, first of all, the division has no aura. When's the last time you watched a flyweight fight and like felt nervous or like felt aura? It's because they're little guys, right? And they typically don't have a lot of knockout power. And to me, finishing ability and knockout power is what creates aura in a fighter. You're not going to have a decision fighter that has a lot of aura, in my opinion. You're either going to have a guy who beats the crap out of people and bloodies and batters them, or you're going to have a guy who's dangerous and goes and puts... That's why Bilal Muhammad has no aura, because he doesn't finish fights. Pantoja has very mild aura, but in general, the flyweight division doesn't have aura, and they struggle to get respect from the fans. The casual fans do not care about the flyweight division, so that's a main thing. And not to mention, Alessandro Pantoja is 10-0 against the top 10 of the flyweight division. He's 10-0. He doesn't have a single loss to anybody in the top 10. And he has 2 wins over Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno, who are respectively number 1 and number 2 in the division. So he's already beaten the number 1 and number 2 contender 2 times. And I think he's fighting Kai France next. If he beats Kai France, I mean, you might as well close shop on the division and make everybody move up to Bantamweight, because what else is there at flyweight, you know? Flyweight, it's going to be very hard for them to ever get out of this rut. Even when Demetrius Johnson, one of the most dominant champions in the history of the UFC, 11 title defenses, finishing everybody in the flyweight division, just showed levels, and he just never could have the division take off, even with a dominant champion, even with a not dominant champion. Whenever they had Figueiredo and Moreno, the quadrilogy, it's just like they have exciting fights, and I love the flyweight division, but, you know, I'm not a casual fan. The casual fans do not give a flying banana about the flyweight division, and it's unfortunate because they have fun fights, they have fun scraps, but there's no aura. The champion has beaten everybody. And yeah, man, so the hype in the flyweight division is just non-existent, and that's the biggest issue, in my opinion. No aura, no hype, and Pantoja's pretty much beaten everybody. Yeah, it's rough for the flyweight division. There's not much you can do. You just kind of have to wait for a new contender to, like, build themselves into a fight with Pantoja, and right now we just don't have that. And moving on to the lightweight division, this is might be one of the most interesting puzzles to solve right now. Who does Islam Makhachev fight? It's a very tricky situation because Islam apparently turned down a fight with Ilya Topuria, citing that he wants Ilya to get a win in the lightweight division before he goes ahead and gives him a title shot, because in his mind, he's already given the featherweight champion in Volkanovski 2 title shots against him. He doesn't feel like he should have to give another quote-unquote smaller guy a title shot. So he's turned down the fight, saying Ilya should get a win. Arman Sarukian forfeited his title shot by pulling out on the day of the fight with Islam, but Then there's Charles Oliveira, who the fans want to see rematch Islam. Then there's Justin Gaethje, who just beat Fiziev and is 3 out of his last 4. So it's like, who does the UFC get the title shot to? Literally any of these 4 guys who get the title shot. I think the most likely is still going to be Ilya or Arman. Even though Islam said he's not fighting Ilya, I could see the UFC like throwing him a bag and he's like, yeah, maybe I will fight Ilya. But Islam wants to, or Team Habib, should I say, wants Ilya Topuria to get a win at lightweight, which I do understand because Islam's legacy is just going to be, yeah, he beat a bunch of featherweights, you know? Whereas if Ilya gets a win in the lightweight division and establishes himself as a legit contender, then there's really not much you can say. You could say, okay, Ilya is a legit lightweight now, and Islam beats him. Islam beat a legit lightweight and former featherweight champion. This guy's the real deal. But it's like, who does Islam fight? Another issue in the lightweight division is that we're about to have a complete changing of the guard. I don't know if that's an issue, but you talk about a lot of guys. Charles Oliveira's 35. Justin Gaethje's 36. Dustin Poirier's 36. Moicano is 36. Who else? Michael Chandler's 38, you know? A lot of the Beneil Dariush 35. Like half the top 10 are 35 plus. And I don't know if that's necessarily an issue, but the unks are on the way out and the young bucks are on the way up. And I'm kind of glad. It feels like we've had the same lightweight division forever. I'm ready for a changing of the guard. I'm ready for the Ignacio Bahamondeses. I'm ready for the Joel Alvarezes and the Forrest Siams and the Grant Dawsons and the Patty Pimblets and the up-and-coming contenders. I'm ready for a new lightweight division. It feels like this division used to be the best, and recently it's just been stuck in the mud with the same guys fighting each other over and over. The Gaethjes, the Poiriers, the Chandlers, all kind of fighting each other. And yeah, man, it's the biggest issue with the lightweight division is who does Islam fight next? There's no clear contender. We don't know what the UFC is going to do. If Islam Makhachev really saying he's not going to fight Ilya unless he gets a win at lightweight. What do you do with Islam? Do you just leave him on ice till then? Do you put together that Arman fight again, despite him pulling out on the same day of the fight or 1 day's notice before the fight? Do you give Gaethje the title shot who got schooled by Max Holloway and struggled to beat a guy that he already had a win over who was number 11? Do you give it to Charles, who's on a 1-fight win streak, who only beat Michael Chandler recently? Do you give it to Ilya when Islam doesn't want to fight him? It's a big mess at lightweight. Let me know what you guys think in the comments on who should fight Islam next. But yeah, that's the biggest issue. No clear-cut contender for Islam Makhachev. And in middleweight, there's not many issues at middleweight, I'll be honest. The middleweight division is arguably in the best state it's ever been, with up-and-coming fighters like Bo Nickel, Rainier DeRitter, Anthony Hernandez, Brendan Allen. I mean, you still got the Roman Delidzes, you got the Kyle Baraljos, you got the Nasruddin Imavovs, the Hamzat Chimaevs. I mean, they have a whole influx of new fighters, new generation fighters coming up in the middleweight division. However, Hamzat Chimaev has the potential to start what we call the inactivity era at middleweight. If you look historically, guys like Robert Whittaker, guys like Israel Adesanya, guys like Sean Strickland, guys like Dricus du Plessis, and even Anderson Silva back in the day, these guys were all active UFC middleweight champions. And I feel like if Hamzat is to go out there, which I think he will go out there and submit Dricus in the first round, we are going to enter a dark time of the middleweight division where we're going to see one title defense on average every 10 to 11 months, maybe even once a year. Because let's be real, guys, Hamzat's had 4 fights in the last 6 years. This guy's one of the most inactive fighters on the roster. And it's crazy to say that because at one point, Hamzat was the most active fighter on the roster. This guy fought 3 times in 66 days, setting a UFC record. And now we can't even get this guy in the cage once a year. So it's like, if he does beat Dricus, part of me will be like excited in the moment because of the hype due around it. But once the dust settles, I'm going to be like, damn, man, now we're going to get a title shot once every year from this guy. And I love Hamzat's fighting style. It's fun. He's ferocious. He's one of the most insane first-round grapplers in the history of the sport. But it's like, if this guy wins the belt, given his recent activity, do we really believe that the second Hamzat wins the belt, he's going to be fighting 3 times a year? I just don't see it, man. I think we're still going to get 1 title defense per year from Hamzat. And it's going to be unfortunate because Dricus is an amazing champion. He fights 2 to 3 times a year. He fights the top guys. He wants to fight the best. He's improving every fight. Dricus is the model champion that you want for every division. And Hamzat has a chance to come in there and steal that. And yeah, man, if he does, it's going to be a rough time for the UFC because, like I said, Hamzat is a fan favorite, but this guy is so inactive that I'm sorry, I just can't root for him to win the belt. I do think he's going to beat Dricus, but you bet your bottom dollar I'm rooting for Dricus because I favor activity and I favor great champions, and that's what Dricus du Plessis is the embodiment of. So yeah, Hamzat Chimaev, the fate of the middleweight division is fully in his hands, depending on if he beats Dricus or not. And the light heavyweight division, for me, the biggest issue is that Ankalaev beats everyone. Now, why is Ankalaev beating everyone an issue? Well, let's be real, guys. Ankalaev is not the most exciting fighter. Listen, he's kind of growing on me, but he's still not the most exciting fighter. Big Ankh is a very lackluster fighter. His fans will gaslight you and tell you, man, you're just a casual, dude. Clearly, you haven't seen Ankalaev's fights, man. This guy has some of the most knockouts in light heavyweight history. And this guy, dude, he has bangers with Johnny Walker and Jan Kutalaba where he knocks him out. Listen, Ankalaev, he had fights like against Nikita Krylov. Do you guys remember anything about him fighting Nikita Krylov? No, because it was a stinker. What about Thiago Santos? A stinker. Even his fight against Alex Pereira, which you can blame on Alex Pereira, a stinker. His fight against Jan Blachowicz, a stinker. I mean, half of Ankalaev's performances in like the last, like I'd say 4 years have been stinkers. And it's unfortunate because this guy has the belt now, and maybe Big Ank will come out there and start finishing guys, but I don't know if I see it. Typically, whenever you see a guy like Ankalaev who fights what I would call safe, he's not going to get the belt and out of nowhere start taking more risk. He's if anything, he's going to start being even more defensive to keep the belt because of how hard he worked to get to it. You think he's going to go out there and put his chin up in the air trying to knock a guy out? No, he's going to be defensively sound. He's probably going to be more wary of not trying to not get finished or knocked out because he wants to hold on to that belt because he worked so long to get to it. And I do respect that, but it's like, man, outside of Alex Pereira, there's nobody at light heavyweight that beats Ankalaev. He's just too fundamentally sound. He's too well-rounded. He's got amazing striking, and he's just too hard to beat, man. There's a reason this guy has not lost since 2018. And even the guy he lost to in Paul Craig beat him at the last second. Paul Craig was getting his ass beat that entire fight. So, yeah, the issue with the light heavyweight division is I'd say it feels like it's regressed in skill. Light heavyweight feel like it's going backwards. Whenever we had the John Joneses and the Rumbles and the Daniel Cormiers and the Ryan Baders and the Prime Glover Teixeiras, I feel like this division was in a better spot, and the Gustafsons. But it's like these days with Jamal Hill and Yuri and Jan Blachowicz, they're good, but it feels like the fighters of the older generations would school all these guys. I feel like Daniel Cormier would school all these guys, man. I feel like Gustafsson would piece up Jamal Hill on the feet, dude. So I feel like the skill has regressed, and Ankalaev is not going to be the most exciting champion. That's the biggest issues I see with the light heavyweight division, and yeah, man, that's all there really is to say about that. And the last thing is women's MMA has regressed in skill in general. I'm not going to cover each division by division because women's MMA as a whole is struggling right now. And if you even look at the 3 champions of women's MMA, they're all 35 plus. Valentina's 36, Zhang Weili's 35, and Pena's 35, I believe. That shows you that the new generation has not been able to capture the belt whatsoever. It's like, who had the belt last in before Zhang Weili? It was Rose Namajunas, maybe? I forget who she won the belt off of. Or no, it was Carla Esparza. Carla Esparza from the old generation. Alexa Grasso, fair enough, was able to get a win over Valentina Shevchenko, but Shevchenko proved that was somewhat of a fluke whenever she destroyed her in the trilogy. And then Juliana Pena, who was the last champion at women's bantamweight? It was Raquel Pennington, another old head. So it's like all the old heads are just holding on for dear life in women's MMA. And what that tells me about women's MMA is that it has severely regressed in skill. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And it confuses me on why the UFC is so like gung-ho on putting these fights on the main card of pay-per-views. Just last pay-per-view, UFC 313, we had Bobby Green versus Mauricio Rufy, right? An insane KO. And then we go to Lemos versus Lucindo, which is just a lay and pray fest. And it's like, dude, that completely killed the hype of the entire card. The momentum we had, it killed it. And yeah, man, the women's bantamweight division, I guarantee you, if I ask you to name me 5 fighters in each of the women's division, you'll probably struggle to do so because there's just nobodies. And I don't know, there's just a lack of money and lack of training in women's MMA, but it just seems like the fighters are getting worse and the fights are getting worse. They're not getting any better. I feel like women's MMA 10 years ago was better. The Ronda Rouseys and the Misha Tates and the Kat Zingannus and the Holly Holmes, you know, I feel like those fighters were more skilled. Now today we got Juliana Pena and Valentina Shevchenko, who's been around forever, and Zhang Weili, who has been around forever. It's like the champions are good. That's the thing about women's MMA, right? The champions, for the most part, Shevchenko and Zhang Weili are miles ahead in terms of skill and head of their division, whereas Pena not so much, but they're miles ahead than the contenders. The contenders are just like terrible. They're all fighting each other. They're all losing. The one fighter beats one fighter, then the other fighter beats the other fighter, and it's just a triangle of losses, and there's never a clear-cut contender in the divisions. I mean, I think Manon Fiorot is the only clear contender right now in all of the women's divisions. Kayla Harrison, you could say a bantamweight, but not really. But it's like, dude, name me 10 WMMA fighters without stuttering. You probably can't do it because there's nobody notable, and they all suck. But yeah, that's the issue with all the women's divisions. They've regressed in skill, and they killed the momentum of all the pay-per-view cards, and yeah. That is the issue with every single division in the UFC. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and thank you guys.